session to address any questions you may have. Please use the GoToMeeting question tool on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have difficulty viewing or reading any of the slides, please click on the Enlarge button located below the presentation screen. If you have any technical difficulties with the webcast, please contact GoToWebinar technical support. For information on DataMotion, please visit www.datamotion.com. I'll now pass things off to Mike to begin today's presentation. Mike?
Well, Andy, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everybody who's here today. I think we'll make this time worth your while. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit about Osterman Research, so you know our perspective in all of this. We're an independent market research and consulting firm, and our focus really is on all things communication and collaboration. Andy, I'm not seeing the next slide. I don't know if maybe others are, but I'm not. There we go. Perfect. Thanks. And so our practice areas really focus on everything related to how people communicate or collaborate in a workplace context. We look obviously at encryption, archiving, security, content management, and so forth. We have a strong emphasis on primary research, and we'll go through a bit of that here today. The company is about 14.5 years old, and we're based near Seattle. So Andy, I'm going to turn it back to you for our first poll question.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So we'd like to start today's webinar with a quick poll question. Hopefully you can see that on the screen. If you were looking for an encryption solution, what is the most important thing you would look for? A, it integrates into your workflow. B, it's an easy recipient experience. C, it's low cost. D, easy deployment and maintenance for administration. Or E, easy user experience. See several answers coming in. And as the answers are coming in, we're about half of us have voted so far. Just a few more minutes to get everyone an opportunity to answer the question. Looks like about 85% of you have voted so far. Last call for votes. And let's go ahead and show the results. So as you see, about 29% of you are looking for an easy recipient experience, and 26% are looking for an easy user experience. Interestingly, integration into the workflow and low cost are the lowest poll results. Mike?
Yeah, this is quite interesting, and I think pretty consistent with what we find in other types of polls like this. As we'll discuss here in just a moment, sort of that legacy of difficulty to use encryption really has held encryption back. So I think people really are looking for ease of use as one of the key criteria here. So let's get right into it. Certainly email continues to dominate. Now, that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but a lot of people believe that email is going away. If you look at the trade press, if you look at various types of publications and forecasts of how people are going to communicate and collaborate and how younger workers are coming into the workforce, you'll get the notion that email is simply going away and it's not important anymore. So you don't need to encrypt it, you don't need to archive it, and so forth. And what we find is that just the opposite is true. The typical information worker sends a median of about 30 emails a day and receives about 100, and they spend about 2.5 hours a day doing something in their email client. Now, that's not just sending or receiving email, but it's using the email system as sort of the jumping off point for a lot of other activities. They're looking for content, they're managing their calendar, managing tasks, and so forth. So email is this central repository of highly critical information. And also, email is not just a communication tool, it's a file sharing tool. Email is the dominant way that people share files in most organizations. Despite the use of FTP systems and Dropbox and lots of other alternatives, email continues to be that primary place that people share files. And if you look at the typical email system, about 98% of the bits that flow through it are actually files, many of which are sensitive and confidential. It's only a small minority of communications that actually constitutes the rest of email traffic. And what we also find is that email is being used more over time. In a recent survey, we found that 52% of end users actually reported using email more than they were just 12 months ago, and only 3% using it less. So bottom line here is that email is a critical communications medium, and it's definitely here to stay for at least the next several years, if not much longer than that. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, a lot of communications that gets sent through email is sensitive or confidential in some way. And what we found in an end-user survey is that more than 2 in 5 email users will sometimes or even frequently not send an email because they're just not sure if that content is going to be encrypted. So if you're sending something like employee information or their health information, financial results, whatever the case is, if it's sensitive or confidential, there are times when employees just won't send information through email simply because they're not sure it's going to be protected from access by unauthorized users. And that creates a real problem for organizations in terms of employee productivity, in terms of the ability to make decisions more quickly, in order to get information to the right people at the right time, and so forth. So the lack of good encryption in many organizations is really holding back organizations' ability to have faster decision-making and enhance their employee productivity. And as you'll see on the next slide, the penetration of encryption is certainly growing, but it's not growing very quickly. If you were to go back 10 years and forecast this figure for 2015, you'd expect a much larger proportion of users to have either manual or policy-based encryption available to them, and really that's not the case. What we found is that only about 38% of users today have either manual encryption or some sort of a secure email gateway that will enforce policy-based encryption. Now what we're finding is that the latter is going to increase fairly significantly by next year. Organizations are beginning to realize just how important encryption is, and many of them are using policy-based encryption schemes so that it can look at the content of an email or an attachment and then automatically encrypt in case that meets some sort of a policy criteria for encrypting that content because it contains maybe a credit card number, protected health information, personal financial information, or something else that's sensitive that needs to be encrypted before it's sent. So on the next slide, you'll see that fundamentally email delivery is fairly risky. We've all done it. All email users will periodically send sensitive or confidential information in a clear text email without any sort of encryption, and sometimes that happens by accident. A Stroh's-Friedberg study, for example, found that nearly 3 out of 5 senior managers have accidentally sent the wrong person some sort of sensitive or confidential information, and that's compared to only 1/4 of workers overall that have done so. And what's really telling here is that senior managers tend to handle more types of sensitive and confidential information, and so they represent an even bigger risk than the typical information worker. And because of the type ahead feature in Outlook, it's easy to actually send a party the wrong email, and sometimes that does contain information that is sent in clear text that otherwise should be encrypted. Personally, for example, I've received things like purchase orders and communications of various types that I was not privy to, that I should not have seen, and that should have been sent encrypted, but was sent to me in clear text. And I was obviously an unauthorized user of that information. I obviously deleted it, but it's the kind of thing that really should be sent in an encrypted way, and very often is not. So as you'll see on the next slide, the proportion of email that really needs encryption varies obviously by organization and by user and so forth. And what we found in a recent end user survey is that the vast majority of information really doesn't need any sort of encryption. About 7 out of 10 emails that are sent by the typical information worker on a typical day are things like, there's birthday cake down the hall, or it's a, fairly innocuous question about a corporate policy, what have you. So there's really not a need for encryption. Another 18% of emails, would be nice if they were encrypted. Maybe it's an embargoed press release, something that's not highly sensitive or confidential, but, it would be nice if it was encrypted, if there was an easy-to-use encryption scheme available to send it. However, 1 out of 9 emails contains highly sensitive or confidential information, and it absolutely should be encrypted, either because of the sensitivity of the information, maybe it contains some sort of intellectual property, or there's a regulation that governs the transmission of that information. So what we're looking at for the typical user, of the 30 emails they send per day, we're looking at about 3 or 4 emails per day that absolutely must be encrypted, and in a lot of organizations they're simply not, and that exposes organizations to a significant amount of risk. Now on the next slide you'll see some of the difficulties of encryption. As I mentioned earlier, some legacy encryption solutions just were not that simple to use, or they required a lot of work to use. And so recipients, when receiving an encrypted email, just had to jump through a lot of hoops in order to open it, or users had to do various things to send it and so forth. And part of the problem with the lack of encryption today is that some of that mindset still pervades decision makers. They still perceive encryption as difficult to use, problematic, and so forth, difficult for end users to open and so forth. So a lot of organizations have opted not to implement encryption simply because of that old mindset. A lot of organizations have not implemented even encryption policies yet, let alone the encryption solution itself, and they have not, as noted earlier, haven't really implemented any sort of policy-based or automated encryption solution that's going to automatically encrypt content based on what's in the email or what's in the attachment. Also, part of the problem as well is that many legacy solutions just don't offer a good mobile experience. And as more and more of the workforce becomes mobile, people using their smartphones, their tablets, and so forth, that ability to have a good encryption experience on the mobile device is going to be absolutely essential in order to speed the growth of mobile encryption, or encryption overall. Next slide, please. So in a recent survey of IT decision makers, we asked, is encryption a difficult thing? And what we found in terms of the desktop encryption experience, only 26% of the decision makers we surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that encrypted emails are easy for recipients to open, and only 17% of end users feel this way. And we found similar results for the mobile experience. Only 28% agreed or strongly agreed that encrypted emails on a mobile device, smartphone or tablet, for example, are easy for recipients to open, and only 1 out of 6 end users felt that way. So bottom line here is that, in the poll that Andy connected earlier, we found that you're really looking for an easy-to-use experience, both for senders and recipients, but the vast majority of recipients don't think that encryption today is an easy-to-use thing. So it's a real problem, and that's one of the key issues that's holding back the greater use of encryption, and one of the fundamental problems that has to be solved in order for encryption to grow and be adopted. Next slide, please. So what happens if you don't properly encrypt content? Well, 47 states today have some sort of a data breach notification law. California started that and has modified their law several times, and that really has spread across the U.S. and really across much of the world. A lot of organizations absolutely have to encrypt data because they have to meet these state data breach notification requirements, which says that if you breach data that's owned by somebody in another state, you have to inform them even if you have no operations in that state. And it's not just that you have to notify about breaches, it's that the types of data over time are expanding. So it's more and more types of data that are coming under the umbrella of these data breach notification requirements, making it more difficult for organizations that don't properly encrypt their content. Also, there are a variety of federal regulations and various industry standards, things like HIPAA, PCI, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, and so forth, that have to be satisfied in terms of encryption because all of these statutes and many more contain specific requirements to encrypt content when it's sent outside the organization or even when it's stored on your own servers. And also, corporate reputation can be fairly seriously damaged by not encrypting content, by allowing data breaches to occur. Next slide, please. And there are some other consequences as well. Certainly there have been a number of studies that have shown that organizations that breach data, Target, for example, have lost customers because customers no longer have the confidence that their data is going to be properly protected. There can be costly remediation efforts, notifying people of the breach, providing credit reporting services, and so forth. There also can be a loss of intellectual property. If you don't properly encrypt content, you can actually lose access to your intellectual property and in some cases lose the rights to it if you don't protect it adequately. There can be lost future revenues from those customers who just won't come back to your organization, and fundamentally lost business opportunities. So it's not just a case of not being able to satisfy regulatory requirements, but also there can be a number of very serious consequences that can have long-term ramifications financially and otherwise for an organization. Okay, Andy, I'm going to turn it back to you for our second poll.
Thanks, Mike. So our next poll is, how would you rate your organization's culture of information security? Are you black belts? Do you take it very, very seriously? Is it a business risk and you're balancing it with the need to get work done? Or is it not much of a consideration? I'll leave that poll, get a lot of people to vote on that. It'd be very interesting. I'm very interested in the results of this because a lot of people say, well, security is not my job, so it's a balance or not a consideration. And yet we've seen from what Mike has presented how important it is to encrypt. About 50% of you have voted. I'll give you a couple more moments here for the rest of you to vote on your opinion. A few more votes coming in here. About 60% of you have voted. A strong leaning towards black belts. They take it very seriously.
Well, that's good news. That's
very good news. Just a couple more moments here. About 65% of you have voted. Get the last people to get their votes clicked on here. While those votes are coming in, just a reminder to everyone that we are recording this webinar. It will be made available to you after the webinar, and these poll results will be in there. All right, we've put this up for a little bit, so let's go ahead and close it. About 70% of you voted. And what we have here, as you can see, is 67 people believe that their organizations are black belts, that they take information security and the culture of information security very seriously. About 26% of you believe it's a balance between business risk and getting work done, and 7% said it's not much of a consideration in your organization. Very interesting results. Mike, back to you.
very good, Andy. Thanks so much. Yeah, interesting results, and certainly you're on the webinar today because you're interested in encryption. So but it's gratifying to see so many are taking it very seriously. So what about the encryption that's included with Microsoft Office 365? Office 365 is really a top-of-mind issue for a lot of decision makers. What we have found in a number of surveys this year is that Microsoft is effectively cannibalizing their Exchange on-premises base and moving those people into Office 365. And they're doing a very good job at it. Office 365 is a great platform. It contains a number of useful features and functions. The pricing of it is such that it can actually be less expensive for an organization to migrate its on-premises users to 365 as opposed to keeping them on-premises and managing servers and so forth. And Microsoft has addressed the need for encryption and provided an encryption capability within Office 365 that's included in the E3 and E4 plans, and it's available as an add-on for other plans. It does require a license for every user who sends encrypted email, which, not surprising, you'd expect that. But it does have some limitations. And this is not a slam against Microsoft or Office 365, but just a realistic assessment of what their encryption capability entails. For example, users can't track the usage of documents using encryption in 365. They can't revoke access to documents, which can sometimes be an important capability for organizations. Also, it doesn't integrate with Windows File Server or for automatic protection with the FCI via the RMS connector. So that's not a showstopper, but it can be a limitation that some organizations are going to run into. Also, Android and iOS devices are actually supported, but it requires access via a downloadable viewer. And that can be a problem for organizations, particularly for traveling users, because not all mobile users are allowed to download third-party applications. In some organizations, the mobile device management solution won't allow users to download an application to their mobile device. And so if you receive an email using Office 365 encryption, you won't necessarily be able to read it right then until your IT has approved your download of that mobile application. Next slide, please. And there are a few other limitations as well. For example, the encryption options in Office 365 don't include SBIME, PGP, or any sort of ad hoc encryption, which can be a problem for organizations that rely on those encryption standards. Also, when an encrypted message is sent via the viewer app or the encryption portal, the sending email actually gets changed to what you see here. And so it's not actually coming from the recipient, it's coming from this address, which is not necessarily, again, any sort of a showstopper, but it can create an impediment, and it doesn't have the appearance of coming from the actual sender itself. Also, new encrypted email recipients, those that don't have a Microsoft account, they basically have to get an account. So they have to provide some sensitive information to create that account in order just to read the encrypted message. Or alternatively, they can receive a one-time password that's sent in clear text, but it's then sent to the same email address that received the encrypted message. And so if that mobile device, for example, has been lost or otherwise compromised, then the encrypted message potentially can be read by an unauthorized party. So again, it's a good encryption capability included with Office 365, but it does have some limitations that you need to be aware of. Now, one of the things we find is that most people tend to view encryption as a defensive play. It's to protect content from being accessed by an unauthorized party, and it's really just to protect the organization and the individuals from bad things happening. But it's also important to view encryption as sort of an offensive opportunity, a way to basically gain some competitive advantage against organizations that aren't effectively using encryption today. Encryption, for example, encourages customers to do more business because they know their security requirements are being met. Just a couple of examples here. Let's say you were going to a doctor for the first time or going to a clinic. If you could complete all of the forms, answer all of the doctor's questions before going, instead of having to arrive early at the office, and you could send all of that information to the doctor or the clinic via some sort of a secure email channel, that could create a better patient experience. You wouldn't have to arrive early, you could answer the questions at your leisure, you could look things up, and so forth. Similarly, a bank could improve the speed of its decision-making for loan processing if their loan applicants could send information via secure email and communicate with loan officers that way as well. So just a couple of examples, but this really applies to just about any industry. If you could communicate with your broker or other people that need sensitive information from you or that want to send you sensitive information, there are numerous business opportunities that could be opened up simply by the use of encryption. And most organizations today aren't fully taking advantage of that, and they really need to create those new business opportunities. So in summary, what we're finding in our research is that a lot of sensitive emails are not encrypted, and they really should be. There's lots of sensitive information going out in clear text email, and it absolutely should be encrypted. Also, a lot of organizations just don't have adequate encryption policies. They haven't determined the specific types of information, either because of best practice or regulatory requirements, that should be encrypted, and that needs to be a first step before encryption is implemented. Also, encryption keys can be lost or they can fail at times, and so you don't have access to the information, and so good key management is an essential element of any encryption scheme. And also, finally, departed employees can create problems. If they have encrypted content and they've left the company and IT doesn't have good management of those keys, that can create a problem, because now content that's encrypted can be locked away and very difficult, if not impossible, to access. Okay, I'm going to turn things back to Andy now for our third poll question and his presentation.
Thanks so much, Mike. So our final poll question: what is your likely next step when it comes to encryption? Do you A, plan to or are evaluating solutions? B, you plan better adherence to encryption policies? C, trying to decide if you need encryption? Or D, nothing at all? While all of you put in your answers to poll questions, I will remind you that the Q&A will start right after this, and you can feel free to start using the questions tab on the GoToMeeting management bar. Feel free to put any questions about encryption, and we will be happy to get to those here momentarily. About 50% of you have put in your answers to the poll. Give just a couple more moments for everyone to answer their questions. And about 5 more seconds here, and we'll give everyone an opportunity to vote in the poll. Let's go ahead and close the poll now. About 61% of you voted. It looks like more than 50% of you are looking at better adherence to your existing encryption policies. 23% of you plan to or are currently evaluating solutions to add encryption. 21% of you don't believe you're going to be doing anything in terms of the next step, and 5% are just really evaluating whether encryption is important in your industry. I find that interesting poll results, don't you, Mike?
Oh, very much so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very encouraging.
Absolutely. So just a little bit about DataMotion. DataMotion is the sponsor of this webinar. We've been around for about 16 years, based in Florham Park, New Jersey. As a secure messaging provider, we support secure email, secure file transfer, and different workflow integrations, including direct secure messaging, which is a secure clinical email. We have more than 5 million users in our environment, and are happy to discuss our secure mail solutions with you at any time. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the slide here regarding who DataMotion is and our contact information, as well as Osterman Research's information and Mike's contact information. And we'll go into the first questions. Our first question, Mike, comes from Ray. It's a comment question about the regulation for encryption in HIPAA. Ray states there is no regulation under HIPAA to encrypt. However, it is an addressable standard. Any comment on that?
Yeah, it is a good question. Yeah, it doesn't specifically say that you have to encrypt content, but it does say that you have to keep content secure. And so, the implication there is that if information is being sent, between benefits administrators and hospitals or doctors and clinics, whatever the case may be, that content really should be encrypted. It has to be kept secure under the security and privacy rules in HIPAA, and encryption really is the best way to do that. Now, you can physically secure data, sending it in sealed envelopes and that kind of thing. But certainly if it's going to be sent electronically, which most organizations are doing today, it absolutely has to be encrypted. And that applies even to, specific, things that might be sent by HR. So for example, if you send information that connects an employee's name with a health condition, that is information that is considered protected health information and has to be protected in some way. And so you need to send that securely, and obviously encryption is the best way to do that.
I absolutely agree. In fact, I would go one step further to say, in our time of covered entities and business associate requirements, where we have breach notifications and breach requirements, The only protection from having to notify of a breach is if you can demonstrate that the information that was breached has been protected by some encryption technology which prevents its exposure. We also know that within the security rule and of HIPAA that there are requirements that reasonable safeguards be applied to the protection of data. And it has been recognized pretty clearly that encryption is considered a very reasonable safeguard. So great catch, Ray. Thank you so much for the input. Our next question, and I'm going to destroy this name. I apologize so much, but Mitiaz has asked, are portals a better solution than encrypted emails? What are the upsides and downsides of using portals? Mike?
Well, I mean, yeah, portals are a good option. They do allow encryption of content, between firewalls and so forth. It depends really on the risk tolerance and the best practices within the organization. Some organizations, for example, prefer end-to-end encryption so that you go between users encrypted. Some prefer just between the firewalls without any encryption within the organization itself. It really is going to depend to a great extent on the organization's risk tolerance and the specific best practices that they've implemented.
Fantastic. So Danny asks, is there a quality solution ready to purchase that answers all of the Microsoft limitations and that is easy to use to send and receive emails from?
Yeah, there are a number of good solutions out there. Ray, I think probably a good segue to introduce the DataMotion solution here.
Absolutely. I didn't want to just bring it up directly as a sales pitch, but absolutely, the DataMotion Secure Mail platform, including our Secure Mail button and delivery of messages directly into and out of Outlook from using your Office 365 environment, is, I think, a very effective solution, and I'm happy to share any information about that. You can also see quite a bit of information at www.datamotion.com about our Secure Mail platform. There's also some key information there about our Office 365 functionality. Our next question is, as an abstractor, how much of my correspondence with clients should be through secure mail?
It really is going to depend on on the types of information you're sending. Certainly not everything has to be encrypted. I mean, if a default of encrypting everything is good, but it certainly isn't necessary. For example, if you're communicating sensitive or confidential information, absolutely it has to be encrypted. If you're just setting up lunch dates or things of that nature, there's really not a need to encrypt that kind of content. And so, encryption does, I mean, even at its best, create at least a tiny barrier for the recipient. If they have to enter a password every time they read a message, it's not a big deal, but it can be, at least this tiny barrier that has to be overcome. And if you can avoid that, if you're sending just, innocuous information, inviting people to things, holiday parties and so forth, it really doesn't have to be encrypted. But certainly, I mean, if you have to choose one default position, encrypt everything is that position.
That's an excellent point. One of the things that I always go back to, especially in healthcare, but in all industries really, as an organization, I strongly encourage all organizations to do some kind of risk assessment of what information you have, what information is considered secure versus not secure, and then evaluate where that information is used, where it is stored, and how it is moved. So, in other words, data at rest, data in use, and data in motion. And after you know what information you have and you can define exactly what information should be encrypted, it gives you a great opportunity to set very specific policies and functions to protect that information.
And one thing I would add to that is that the default position of encryption is a good one if you're not sure if content should be encrypted. For example, if you're forwarding a long email thread, there might be something sensitive or confidential buried 3 feet down in that thread that you just didn't see, and you may think that the thread is not confidential or sensitive in any way, but if there's even a chance it might be, then encryption is a good default position.
Absolutely. Our next question is really kind of interesting. I've been looking at it trying to figure out how I might answer it. How do companies know if they fall under a specific government requirement? For example, a small law office or a small financial office. What compliance or governmental regulation do they fall under?
Yeah, that's obviously going to vary by industry, but our advice is to go to either your chief legal counsel or an external legal counsel and get advice on that. There's this notion out there that there are regulated and unregulated industries, and that organizations that are in the financial services space, healthcare, energy, pharma, life sciences, what have you, have regulations that they have to satisfy and nobody else does. And that's not really the case. There are heavily regulated organizations and lightly regulated ones, but all of us have some level of regulation we have to satisfy, particularly with regard to encryption. So, certainly I would go for advice to legal counsel to see what needs to be encrypted, and what regulations you fall under. But just about every organization out there is going to have some level of regulatory obligation to encrypt content.
I absolutely agree. Another thing to consider is that the regulations are not always specific to industry. Regulations are generally specific, the ones at least we've spoken about today, are specific to types of data. HIPAA, for example, may not apply to you. You may not think it applies to you in a small law office. Yet if you are gathering your employees' health surveys for health insurance, you are in possession of protected health information, and that needs to be protected when it's being sent or received. Additionally, if you are in an office that accepts credit cards and the tool by which you accept credit cards would be covered under PCI. So it isn't just about what industry you're in, but actually about the kind of data you're moving. So again, I strongly encourage you to review your options with your legal counsel. Our next question is, how does a person such as a notary acquire encrypted services? And I'm going to just throw it right out there. Adrian, please give me send me an email to andy@datamotion.com, and I'm happy to share that with you. You also can find a number of other vendors of similar solutions on the internet. Going to the next question here. Is it safer to send information via fax or via email? Compare fax and email. Mike?
That's a good question. Fax is still widely used as sort of a safe communications medium in the healthcare industry, for example, between doctors' offices and so forth. So it's hard to say. I mean, fax is safer in the sense that it's not sent out there in this digital form that's available to just anybody like email could be if it's sitting in clear text on an email server. The downside of fax is, one, it's not easily convertible into other systems and so forth. If you have a piece of paper, it has to have manual entry and so forth. Also, fax can be highly insecure. If you're sending a fax that goes, let's say, to a fax machine in a common area, anybody can read that information. So if you're going, let's say, from a doctor's office to a pharmacy, there's the potential for that information to be accessed by unauthorized users. Certainly encryption is a better option, but fax is a reasonable one if you have control over both ends of the sending and receiving process.
One of the components about faxing that is important to consider is that when you fax a document, the recipient experience and that recipient document is entirely out of your control. Many encryption solutions allow you to control end users' use and access of that information. So if you wish to recall it, you wish to deactivate the key so it's no longer available, you don't have that kind of functional option when you're sending a fax. It is no longer under your control. You also have no confirmation of delivery and correct delivery unless you go to the second step of calling and saying, did you receive my fax? So the possibility of sending to the wrong fax number or an invalid delivery is increased because you don't have the tracking and reporting mechanisms. When you send a fax, you simply don't have the delivery confirmation. Our next question comes to us from Danny, and he says, there are several good solutions, but you only mentioned your own. Am I willing to share others? Absolutely, Danny. There are a number of them out there. A number of them are specific to devices. Dell SonicWall, for example, has a built-in email encryption. Cisco has a couple of different encryption solutions for email. I would, going through your IT people, going through different information sources, as well as the internet, are great locations to find other email encryption and storage encryption solutions. The next question we have asks, is it better to use encrypted email to send and receive orders, which sometimes have a client's personal information? We are a small abstracting company, and for now, and we would like to be compliant when we grow. It's kind of confusing as to what we should be doing. Mike?
Yeah, I would say, certainly things like orders are, they do contain sensitive information because, particularly if they contain, any sort of financial information like a credit card number, that kind of thing. But just the order itself, even if it's a purchase order without any sort of highly sensitive information, really should be encrypted because you're sending information about your buying plans, the vendors you're choosing, and so forth. And depending upon the type of product you're ordering, that can be somewhat sensitive. It is competitive information. It's valuable to somebody, and we would highly recommend that kind of information be encrypted.
I'll throw it out there. That was our last submitted question, I think. Are there any other questions? Again, you use the question tab at the bottom of the GoToMeeting control panel. Give just a couple of moments while we wait for any final questions to come in. Mike, any final words of wisdom?
Well, certainly, I think it's important for decision makers to understand that encryption really is an easy-to-use technology today. That was not the case before, even just a few years ago, but I would encourage anybody who's reluctant to use encryption to seriously consider it and do your due diligence and understand that encryption today is easy to use, even on mobile devices, and to actively pursue encryption is a very high priority.
Excellent. Had an interesting question come in. Says, I know encryption is important, but I'm having trouble getting executive management to sign off on it in the budget. Any questions? Mike?
Yeah, that's a problem that a lot of IT and security people have. That it's what we find in our research is that a lot of decision makers, a lot of business decision makers, are reluctant to fund budget for anything until a problem has occurred. They tend to be fairly reactive instead of proactive. And buying encryption is almost like buying life insurance. I mean, you can send protected health information through clear text email, and probably nothing bad is going to happen there. It's the kind of thing that you don't really want to wait until you've been hacked or until information has been intercepted and used in a nefarious way before you do something about the problem. In most cases, nothing bad's going to happen. Just like with insurance, you can drive around or you can do things without really taking advantage of that insurance, but you want to have that insurance there in case something bad does happen, because inevitably something is going to happen. Your emails are going to be intercepted. They're going to be sent to the wrong people. You are going to be hacked, and so it's important to have that encryption in place to ensure that when something bad happens, you're protected.
Great. Another question that's come in, we're seeing an increased use of smartphones by our employees. Can you speak to encryption of emails on smartphones? Mike, I'm going to let you take a first round of this, and then I will also comment on it.
Okay. Yeah, it's important to have a good encryption experience on a smartphone. It's difficult to use some of the older encryption schemes on smartphones because you have to type in long passwords and a tiny keyboard and so forth. And so it's important to be able to have that good mobile experience, and that really needs to be baked into the solution that you ultimately choose. We're finding more and more organizations are going mobile, and it's just important to have both a good desktop encryption experience and a good mobile one as well. So that ease of use is significantly more critical for mobile users than it is even for desktop users.
Whenever you're evaluating an encrypted messaging solution provider, that's definitely a question I would ask. What is the mobile experience compared to the desktop experience? Is it a different environment or the same environment for mobile versus desktop? And is it a different recipient experience, mobile versus desktop? And use those as part of your evaluation of solutions. We have another interesting question here. In the future, do you see new technologies that would automatically encrypt email? Do you believe that this is a technology out there that might become a de facto standard?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are a number of encryption standards today, like S-MIME and so forth. I think the technology you choose is probably not so critical as the just the fact that you're encrypting content. It's highly critical to encrypt your content and just make sure that you're using an industry standard from a vendor that has a long track record of providing good support.
I would also say that when I think of automatically encrypting, I think of gateway solutions or policy-based encryption solutions. There are a number of solutions available where as an email moves through the email gateway, the email is audited to see if the content or payload should be encrypted or should not be encrypted based upon the specific policies of the organization. For example, a hospital might put a list of caveats around what their medical record number is. A financial institution might encrypt any 16-digit number. Any institution might encrypt any 10-digit number, as a social security number might be, or any 3-2-4-digit number. So policy-based encryption that automatically secures and encrypts messages based upon specific policy is already available and widely accepted. An interesting question from Julia: why would you want to automatically encrypt all emails?
I think just as a safeguard to ensure that nothing gets through. If you have a manual encryption capability, for example, that's where somebody can click a button in Outlook to encrypt emails on a case-by-case basis. That's a good idea. I mean, it does work, but there will be situations in which employees miss something. They forget to click the encryption button. Maybe they thought something was innocuous, but there was something sensitive or confidential down in an email thread. So, if you're going to default, as I mentioned, it's a good idea to default to encryption just to make sure that, just in case something is sensitive or confidential, it's encrypted along with the stuff that doesn't need to be.
Excellent. There are a couple of questions specifically about DataMotion Secure Mail platform and DataMotion Secure Mail solutions. I'll address them kind of in bulk. I would absolutely encourage you to go to datamotion.com and you can actually sign up for a free trial of the DataMotion Secure Mail solutions, which will give you the opportunity to experience both the sender and receiver experience. I'm also happy to do a demo of those directly for you. My contact information is on the screen, and I'm happy to have you reach out to me. We have another question here. It says that I know some platforms have internal and external encryption. Can you discuss the differences and describe whether your solution encompasses both? Mike, I'll let you handle the discussion about what is internal versus external, then I'm happy to talk a little bit about DataMotion specific.
Okay. Some organizations like that end-to-end encryption where you're going from the desktop to the desktop or the mobile device to the mobile device in a completely encrypted manner. There are some problems in doing that. For example, if you need to archive content, it's important to either decrypt the content before it goes into the archive or provide a way for IT to completely manage those keys so that when they pull information out of the archive, it can be decrypted. So a lot of organizations, because of that, have opted to encrypt between the firewalls so that encryption within the organization behind the firewall is not encrypted. It's really going to depend on your organization's risk tolerance, the best practices you subscribe to, and so forth. We don't really have a recommendation either way. It's probably a good idea in some ways not to encrypt behind the firewall only because of the archiving issue or the backup issue, but certainly, I mean, it's going to depend on the organization itself and the types of information that they need to have access to readily.
Absolutely. The other thing, I will go back to my risk assessment. When determining whether you want to use an internal encryption solution versus an external encryption solution, the deciding factor is that what is the level of risk and what is the reason you would encrypt internally versus what the reason you would encrypt externally. If you have risk internally, you have to evaluate the accessibility and the availability of sensitive data to non-essential employees and evaluate whether encryption is the right solution or access control methods are a better solution. So again, I would start with my risk assessment. We have a question here about forwarding an encrypted message. If you forward an encrypted message, does it remain encrypted, or especially when it moves to a different email platform? For the data motion solution, if you are the sender and your message is forwarded, the recipient is actually in control of whether or not it's encrypted. In fact, for most email-centric solutions, once it is moved to a new platform and a new sender, it is up to the sender system to determine if it's encrypted or not. Having said that when you are using document-focused encryption solutions, it remains encrypted based upon the document solution that you are using. For example, an encrypted PDF that has a separate key for decrypting it would remain encrypted. But an email that has been decrypted for you to read and then forwarded on may or may not be, depending upon the sender's actions. We have about 4 minutes left for questions before we have to wrap it up. And let's see, I think we've answered that one. We've answered that one. Here's an interesting one. Do you believe, Mike, that we will have see all email carriers add some basic encryption methodology to their offerings?
I think so. I mean, we've already seen that. A lot of carriers today encrypt content. It's not universal, but certainly a lot have. I think we will see more use of encryption. Encryption, has become a somewhat controversial issue in the industry because, the FBI or the CIA wants backdoors into encrypted content, for obvious reasons. So it has become, somewhat controversial to some people, but certainly I think we will see more use of encryption simply because it's a best practice that should be followed. Organizations of all sizes, and really across all industries send various types of sensitive content, and it really does need to be encrypted. You've often heard the term that email is like a postcard, anybody can read it, and that's absolutely true. It's just sent in most email is sent in clear text, and it absolutely needs to be encrypted to protect that content from prying eyes.
Excellent. Well, as I don't see any more questions coming in, Mike, I want to thank you so much for presenting this information. I certainly appreciate you being on this valuable session, and I believe that the attendees would agree that great information to have. This does conclude today's. Oh, absolutely. This does conclude today's presentation, Encryption: Key Issues to Consider. If you have additional questions, please feel free to contact Mike or myself. As I said before, a recording of this webinar will be made available to you. And I thank you again for joining us on Content Encryption: Key Issues to Consider. Have a great day, everyone.